So Rabbi Pekarsky would say, are you alive today because you weren't hit by a truck? Or are you alive today because you have some purpose that you're living for? In other words, are you alive because you just happen to be breathing? Or is it because there's something which you're actually drawing some inner strength from? And that's the purpose of this course. Strength and struggle is an exercise in character. We're going to uncover some of the most unflattering characters of all of Jewish history. I warn you, tonight's topic is graphic for sensitive viewers. It really is something which I personally can't relate to. And you'll see why soon. If there's one character in all of Judaism that I cannot relate to, it's Jephthah, our friend here tonight. It's by confronting the stories of the least flattering of our great people, as well as some of the most flattering, the good, the bad, as well as the ugly, we'll be able to discover a message that's relevant and speaks to us. Why would this be incorporated and included in the Torah? It's for a reason. Not because the Torah is a collection of cute historical anecdotes and stories, but because the Torah is an eternal guide, a living GPS to guide us, human beings, through the generations, through the vicissitudes of time, through our challenges, giving us strength through our struggles. And that's the goal of this course. What we're going to try to do is to address three main points. Number one, we're going to try to discover the accurate narratives of these larger-than-life stories, some of which you've heard snippets about. And the reason I say some of which you heard snippets about is because people like Joseph and Moses, Abraham and Sarah, you probably heard a lot about. The reason is because they made it into the 5 books of Moses. But after the Torah was completed, the 5 books of Moses was completed when Moses passes away, begins Moses' successor. Anybody remember his name? Joshua. And from Joshua until the destruction of our first temple by the Babylonians, which was about 1,200 years later, there's this gap in time known as the era of the prophets and the judges, which are less famous than the era of the 5 books of Moses. These are the subjects of our haftarot. The haftaras that we read on Shabbat, bar mitzvah readings. A haftara comes from the prophets, what we read after the Torah reading. And for some reason, they're just less famous than the 5 books of Moses. And the characters we're going to discover in the 6 weeks of this semester are less famous. You may have heard a little bit about them. And we're going to, number one, accurately narrate their stories. Number two, we'll provide the historical context in which these characters really lived, which is going to frame their errors in a completely different light. And the goal is to apply their lessons to our lives, transforming them from mere stories into what I call a compass. What's a compass? A guide. So without much further ado, I'd like to start right away, because there's lots to cover here, with a poem I'd like you to look at on page 6. By Sheldon Silverstein, a famous American poet who passed away a couple years ago, Jewish. He writes as follows. There is a voice inside of you that whispers all day long, I feel this is right for me, I know that this is wrong. No teacher, preacher, parent, friend, or wise man can decide what's right for you. Just listen to the voice that speaks inside. Agree or disagree? Agree. Michael Saunders?
Agree.
Yeah? Shari?
I agree somewhat.
Alan? Yeah, okay.
If we didn't listen to other people for sometimes direction, guidance, education.
Okay, good. Alan?
I agree and disagree. Sometimes
Very Jewish.
Sometimes it's wrong.
Maybe.
I agree.
When I was in Melbourne, Australia, I was getting my rabbinical degree. There was the patron of the yeshiva had a sign in her fridge. It said, "My final answer is maybe." Maybe, and that's final. Something like that. Okay, so,
Can I say something in response to what Sherry said?
yes.
With regards to, you want to listen to what other people say, but it's that voice that tells you whether you're going to listen or not. So it's still the voice.
I like that. It's a very nice insight that you put in there. I like that. It's good. So, we're going to address this, to reassess this poem at the end of the lesson. That was just an introductory thought process. Character, right? Character is who do you listen to? You follow the voice inside, or maybe not. Today's lesson, we're going to focus on this specific character, Jephthah, and his daughter. It's all about a matter of perspective. And let's start with this lesson video, which is going to introduce the topic.
The multiple tribes of Israel united as a nation under the strong leadership of Moses. In the year 1273 BCE, Moses handed the reins to Joshua, who led the Jews in the conquest of Canaan. Joshua preserved national unity and uniform commitment to Torah laws. After Joshua's passing, the elders struggled to maintain the status quo, but soon there were no more elders. The year 1228 BCE marked the start of a troubling era of instability that would stretch for another 350 years. This period became known as the Era of the Judges. Lacking central leadership, the nation's unity fell prey to tribal interests. Spiritual integrity disintegrated on an individual and national level. Moral decay led many to adopt the paganism of their neighbors. Soon enough, a pattern emerged. As the Jews sunk into a spiritual abyss, they found themselves subjected to pagan oppression. Eventually, their suffering induced an awakening. They cried out to God in repentance, and He sent relief in the form of a shofet, a judge, an exceptional man or woman who broke the enemy's shackles, united the nation, and administered moral healing, but all to a limited degree. Until a monarchy was established in 879 BCE, this cycle was unfailing. Each judge's death was met with decline, oppression, repentance, and then a new hero. Famous judges of that era include Deborah the prophetess, who oversaw the defeat of the Canaanite enemy, and Samson the mighty, who broke the back of the Philistine foes. An exceptionally dark incident during the era was the outrage of Gibeah, a mass rape that prompted civil war in which the tribe of Benjamin was almost annihilated. In particular, the death of the judge Jair of Gilead in 996 BCE was met with drastic anarchy and idolatry, followed by 18 years of oppression at the hands of the ancient nation of Ammon. It was in this instability that the protagonist of today's lesson, Jephthah of Gilead, was born.
So hopefully that gives us some historical context of what it is that we're talking about here today. As we learn, Michael, I think it gives you BCE, we're talking about 3,000 years ago, right? Is this era of the judges. 879 BCE was the first king of Israel. That was King Saul. But from the time of Joshua, which was, I think, 1313 BCE, until 879 BCE, it was that 400-500 years, the people descended into this recurring theme of sin, which led to oppression, which then ultimately led to teshuvah, repentance, and the rise of a new hero. And around it went. If you take a look at the screen here, you'll see, it's actually printed also in your books, I believe. Yeah, on page 7. You'll see this list over here where the first Shofet, the judge, was Gideon, 40 years. Then came Avimelech for 3 years. The fifth guy here down in the middle is Jephthah. He's the guy we're going to be talking about today, 982 to 976 BCE. Samson is there. Well, actually, these aren't this is not the complete. This is just the abridged list. I'm sorry. You got the full list is in your text on page 7. Starts with Joshua, and it goes all the way down to Eli the high priest. Now, Eli the high priest was involved in the story of Samuel. Samuel was basically his protege. Samuel the prophet. And Samuel is the one who anoints King Saul as the first king of Israel, as well as King David as the second king and eternal king of Israel. So they got the bridge from Moses all the way to King David on this page 7. So it's a very important chart you got there to bridge a major gap in Jewish history. By the way, you probably heard of the term Tanakh, which is the body of Torah. It stands for 3 words. Ta stands for Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The N, stands for Nevi'im, which is prophets. And the Cha, Tanakh, stands for Ketuvim, which is the writings, like Esther and Song of Songs and the Book of Psalms. Together, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, the books of the prophets, as well as the books of the writings, make up the body of Torah, of the written Torah, which is not the oral Torah, the Talmud, which is over there, and the Kabbalah, which is also around here somewhere. Fine. But it's interesting that there was this recurring theme here, right? You've got this theme of the people become successful and therefore complacent. Soon after, they fall into apathy, which ultimately leads them into sin. God is trying to get their attention. He persecutes them, sends a nation to persecute them. They cry out, and then he sends them a judge to save the day. Okay? So, which by the way tells us a lot. It's just a quick tangent here. Tells us a lot about some of our own problems. We all experience different problems in our lives. Sometimes your back comes out of whack. Right? Different issues. Maybe it's for a message. Maybe there's a message going on here. Maybe God is trying to get our attention.
Yeah, move closer to the show.
Yeah, maybe you need to move closer to the shul. I know a good realtor, by the way. Dvar, I know a good realtor. So, maybe there's a message here. Could it be that the bad things that are happening to you are maybe not necessarily bad things? Could it be that maybe God is trying to establish a relationship with you? Look, you're trying to get the attention of your child, of your 25-year-old child. He's not answering your calls. You know one way to get the attention of a 25-year-old son? Call American Express. Call American Express. Cancel the card. It's not going to take very long before he calls you. Right? Think about it, right? Or cancel his cell phone bill. Stop I don't know if stop paying his car insurance is going to make a difference. But yeah, stop paying his cell phone bill. You'll be much quicker than his credit card even. Right? Well, he won't be able to call you. He won't be able to call you, so it's a problem.
Your friend to call you to get the money.
Right. So, could it be that the bad things that happen to us are maybe God just trying to get our attention? I miss you, my son. I love you. Maybe. Just a point to consider. Okay. So, here we are. We're talking about this era, 997 BCE to 979 BCE. Let's discover this fellow Jephthah. Text 2. We're going to read this straight out of the Judges. A little bit different to the other JLI sessions. There's going to be more text in this course, simply because we're analyzing the text of these characters straight out of the prophets. So let's take a look. Text number 2. The Israelites continued to do that which displeased God, and they served the idols of Baalim, Ashtarot, the gods of Aram, Sidon, Moab, Ammon, and Philistine. The Israelites forsook God, and they did not serve Him. God's anger was provoked against Israel, and He delivered them into the hands of the Philistines and Ammonites. They crushed and broke the Israelites, those that dwelled beyond the east of the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in the Gilead. That year and for 18 years that followed, the Ammonites then crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah, Benjamin, and the house of Ephraim, and Israel was greatly distressed. The Israelites cried to God, "We have sinned against you, for we have forsaken our God, and we have served the idols, the Baalim." God said to the Israelites, "Did I not save you from the Egyptians, the Amorites, the Ammonites, and the Philistines, the Sidonians, the Amalek, and Maon oppressed you. You cried to me, and what happened? I saved you from their hand. Yet you have forsaken me once again and have served other gods. What's wrong with you guys? Therefore I will not continue to save you. Nope. Go cry to your gods that you've chosen. Let them save you in time of distress. Go to your gods. You see, God is losing his patience here a little bit, which is a little unusual. The Israelites said to God, we've sinned. Do to us whatever pleases you, only deliver us now this day. And the Israelites removed the foreign gods. That's the key here. When they finally made the move to get rid of the foreign gods from amongst them, they served God, and God now was grieved by Israel's anguish. Okay, now he's shaking a leg. The Ammonites gathered and encamped in Gilad. The Israelites assembled to defend themselves and encamped in Mitzpah. The people and the princes of Gilad said to one another, whoever shall begin to fight against the Ammonites shall be the head over all the inhabitants of Gilad. If you look over the page, just to show you a map over here, page 10, you'll see right in the middle of the page, you see the two oceans. There's like a little sea. Well, you got the Mediterranean Ocean on the left. Then in the middle, near the top, you have the little Sea of Galilee. Can you see it? Mm-hmm. And then beneath that, you got the Dead Sea, which is that long sea, and the Jordan River connecting them. That's really the battlefield. The Jordan River is the battlefield. On the left, if you see the little city of Mitzpah is where the Jews were assembled. That's where Jerusalem is today. And on the right, you see where it says Gilad. That's where the Ammonites were assembled. Interesting that the Ammonites nation is the same place where Amman is the capital today, in Jordan. It's interesting. Okay, so the Jews are looking for someone to fight for them. What do? Page 11. Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty man of valor, the son of a harlot. Very important piece of information, as we'll find out soon. Gilad, his father, begot Jephthah, and Gilad's wife also bore him sons. So this guy had two wives. Oh, he had a wife and he had a harlot, I guess. The sons of Gilead's wife grew up and expelled Jephthah. They said to him, you shall not inherit in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman. Jephthah fled from his brothers and dwelt in the land of Tov. Lowly men gathered around Jephthah and followed him. So basically, this guy, Jephthah, by no fault of his own, he was born with his mother is a harlot. What's he going to do? You know? So his brothers, from his father's through his father, they had a legitimate mother, they said, you won't inherit with us. They kicked him out. Now, just important to note, these guys why did they expel him? Seems like it was financially motivated. They said, you won't inherit with us. Now, legally speaking, that is incorrect. Just to point out, you cannot, anyone inherits from their parents, even from an illegitimate mother. It doesn't matter. An illegitimate union, if it's your child, they inherit. That's the way it works, right? Let's carry on. Top of 12. After many days of Jephthah's stay in the land of Tov, where his brothers drove him away, the Ammonites waged war against Israel. At that time, the elders of Gilad went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tov. They said to Jephthah, come and become our chief, and we will fight the Ammonites. In other words, they recognized he became like a thug. Lowly men gathered around him. Mm-hmm. So he became like a thug, hooligan. But they recognized that he was a great man of valor, is what it said before, right? A mighty man of valor. So they recognized, this is the guy, then we need to lead us. But it's a problem, because Jephthah responded, did you not hate me and drive me from my father's house? Now you remember me. Why have you come now to me when you need me, when you're in distress? So they answered, therefore we return to you now. You're right, come with us and fight the Amorites, and you shall become our leader of all the inhabitants of Gilad. In other words, we feel bad about it. We regret it. So Jephthah responded, okay, here's the deal. If you bring me back to fight the Ammonites and God delivers them before me, then I will be your leader. As long as I become your leader, I'll do it. The elders of Gilad said, God will testify to our agreement. According to your word, will we do. Jephthah went to the elders of Gilad. The people appointed him as a head and chief over them. And Jephthah repeated the terms of the agreement before God in Mitzpah. He made sure that this was notarized and signed. Jephthah sent messengers to the king of Ammon, saying, what is between me and you that you have come to me to fight in my land? It's very interesting. If you want to see it in the appendix later, Appendix A, the notes, the messages that Jephthah sends to the Ammon is, what do you guys want from us? And they said, well, What else is new? You stole our land. The land of Israel is our land. You stole it. Sounds like United Nations. So Jephthah actually answers them in the Appendix A, you'll see later, that we didn't actually steal the land. You're historically incorrect. We conquered the land from another nation. We drove them out. Not you guys. This was not your land. And mind your own business, basically. They refused and they waged war against the Jews. Okay. So, how many, what?
How many years?
It says 18 years. They oppressed the Jews until Jephthah showed up. And now he confronts them. He says, okay guys, enough of this aggression. You've got to stop this. And they said no, so they started attacking the Jews in a war. And you'll find out in just a moment what happened. Let's just take a moment to dwell on the injustice here that happened to Jephthah, where his brothers drive him out of his own home. So they were obviously financially motivated. It was unjust. Why would the leaders ignore such a travesty? How could the courts, the rabbis, allow such a thing to happen?
He had power,
Who had power?
the family.
Yes, exactly right. As mentioned in the video, after Moses and Joshua, the people, there's a word for falling, they fell into the abyss. They lacked proper leadership. So there were the rich and there was the poor. And the rich families had more resources and the poor families had less resources. So the rich were perceived as more powerful. And maybe if there was an inheritance here, and this was an important person, Jephthah, the son of Gilad, then there was a substantial inheritance here. There was a very wealthy family. You're talking about, the Rockefeller family. And, the rabbis didn't want to stand up to him. This is the guy that made a big donation to the shul. So the rabbi didn't have the gumption to stand up and say, listen, this is wrong. To be known, the rabbis have had a hard time standing up to people who need to be addressed because they wave the checkbook in their face. It happened. So that's really what happened. It's actually interesting. What?
Why does it say the sons of the wife expelled? Why don't they have any?
Because the sons of the wife, they were the sons of the legitimate.
But why is it only mentioned the son? Why isn't it mentioned?
Because this guy Gilad had a wife, and then he had a harlot.
No, that part I understand. But why doesn't it say the sons of the father? Why is it only the sons?
Because they were all sons of the father. Even Jephthah was the son of the father.
No, but to me, there's no culpability by the father of the sons. It's only.
Why was it his fault? What did he do wrong?
Why do they only mention the mother? Why not the? Why
Because
is
that identified them.
Why is it just the children?
Because, Sherry, that's what identified them. They were identified as the sons of the mother. The legitimate ones were the ones that drove out the illegitimate brother. Sherry, I don't think it's pointing a finger. I think it's just identifying who drove out who.
I think so too. How else would you know?
So I just want you to see, if you take a quick look at text number 4, just one second, in the opening line of the story of Ruth, which we read on Shavuot, it speaks about the judges being judged. Because apparently, in this era, the judges themselves were corrupt.
Back in those days, wasn't it okay to have 2 or 3 wives? So why would the son of the first wife be more legitimate than the son of the second wife? Why would that be?
It's a good question. It's not quite clear why.
He wasn't married because he wasn't married.
Okay, so he wasn't married.
He wasn't married.
Some opinions say it wasn't a wife but a concubine, which is not totally married. Other opinions explain that what it means by a harlot is that it was a woman from another tribe. And what's the problem with a woman from another tribe? The problem is that, remember, the lands were inherited, and these were ancestral lands. So if you married a woman from another tribe, you were basically, for love, selling your ancestral piece to the son of your wife, and it could go to another tribe. Because if the husband would die before the wife would inherit the husband, right? And then potentially your ancestral land could go to another tribe, and that's what's called a harlot. So basically the brothers wanted to drive him out. They want to have nothing to do with this guy. So you see over here that the judges themselves were corrupt. which brings to mind a cute story of a rabbi who opens his mail one day and he finds a letter, one piece of paper, in an envelope. On the envelope in capital letters it says, imbecile. Imbecile. That's it. That's what it says. One word in the whole letter. So he gets up in Shul on Shabbos and he says, the strangest thing happened to me this week. Many times I've seen people write me letters and they forget to sign their name. But this week, somebody wrote me a letter. He signed his name, but he forgot to write the letter. So, it's nothing new to have people who don't get along with the rabbi. There's nothing wrong. That's as old as time itself. Because show me a man without enemies and I'll show you a man without principles. Show me a man without enemies and I'll show you a man without principles. Somebody who everybody hates him, there's something wrong with him. But somebody who everybody likes him, there's also something wrong. If everybody likes you, there's a problem. That's what the Rabbi says. Isn't that interesting? If there's not someone that doesn't like you, it means you're lacking in spine. Even Mordechai, at the end of the Purim story, it says at the end of the Megillah, the whole Purim story, you'd think that Mordechai would be God's gift to mankind. It says he was accepted by most of his brethren. Who are these people that didn't think that Mordechai did a good job in saving them? Right? Apparently there were people that said that Mordechai is a rabbi, he should not be involved in politics. That was a big problem in those days. What's this rabbi doing in politics? Right? So these were the failings of the rabbis in that generation, who were afraid to stand up to the powerful ruling families in those days. Okay? So to summarize this on the screen, right? To summarize this on the screen, you got the judges themselves who were corrupt, and also they were intimidated by the wealthy families. Their error can be crystallized as follows. On the one hand, they trivialized the suffering of a simple person that they didn't deem to be important. Here they made a molehill out of a mountain. They made a molehill out of a mountain. Like the woman who calls the dentist and she says, how much does it cost to pull a tooth? $800. $800? That's a travesty. There's got to be a cheaper way to do it. So they say, well, if we did it with not the dentist, but just a student who's in training, we could probably do it for $400. Still too much. Well, I guess if we did it without anesthesia, we get it down to $200. Okay, we're getting better, but I still need it better. Just to pull a tooth. I'm just pulling a tooth, for heaven's sake. $200. So they say, well, I guess if we don't use any surgical tools, we just use an old pair of pliers, and there's no anesthesia, and it's just a student, we could do it for $100. Fantastic, she says. Please book an appointment for my husband Moshe next Thursday. So here they trivialized the pain of another. And that was a big mistake. Also, another problem that they had is that they exaggerated the influence and the power of the ruling families. They felt that they couldn't stand up to the people that they really could. They made here a mountain out of a molehill. So when it comes to the dignity of this poor Jephthah, they made a molehill out of a mountain. When it comes to the power of these families, they made a mountain out of a molehill. How do we know, by the way, that they should have stood up to them? How do we know that they really could have stood up to these ruling families? The reason is because of a very powerful principle that the Torah teaches us. Page 13, text 5. It says, God said, I do not request according to my abilities, but commensurate to yours. I never asked you, says God, to do anything which you don't have the power to overcome. I never ask you to do something which you don't have the power to overcome. If you are in a situation, you are never... I remember Jonathan Sachs, the chief rabbi of the Commonwealth, former chief rabbi of the Commonwealth. He was sitting with the Rebbe as a college student, and he said, the circumstance in which I find myself, and the Rebbe stopped him. He says, no. A Jew never finds himself in a circumstance. You never are a victim of your circumstance. You are always the master of your circumstance. If you've been placed in a situation, it means that you have the capacity and the tools and the talents to change that circumstance. In the words of the Talmud, lefum gam lashichna, according to the camel is the load. Depending on what kind of camel you are, is what kind of load that God puts on your shoulders. If you're a dromedaris, is that what a one-hump camel is called? Then you get a certain kind of load. If you're a two-hump camel or a three-hump camel, whatever you got is what God puts upon you. When we speak about the straw that broke the camel's back, that's not Kabbalistically accurate. Because there cannot be a straw that breaks the camel's back unless you failed your test. You already have the power to overcome the circumstance. Everything is by divine providence. God may put you in a situation so that you can overcome it. And the judges in the generation of Jephthah should have known this. They should have known that this was a divine test. Ironically, destiny led them to regret this, in that the small issue that they trivialized, which was Jephthah's dignity, came to haunt them. Because what they decided to ignore, now they needed to treat as a mountain. Because they came crawling on all fours, asking Jephthah, please, could you be a leader over us? And what they considered to be a mountain, which was the ruling class, became completely irrelevant as they didn't even ask them about making Jephthah their leader. It was George Bernard Shaw who said that you should be kind to the people that you meet on your way up, since they tend to be the exact same people that you meet on the way back down. Right, so be careful. Okay, so there we go. We've discussed a very critical component here of the story, which is the failure of the judges to make a move in stopping the travesty of Jephthah's banishment, and the irony of how they had to repair that situation. And that was because of their jaded perspective in trivializing and exaggerating the wrong things. So let's see what happens now. Text number 6. Page 15. The king of Ammon did not listen to the words that Jephthah sent him. The Spirit of God was upon Jephthah, and he went through Gilad, Menashe, and Mitzvah of Gilad. From Mitzvah of Gilad, he proceeded to the land of Ammon. Jephthah made a vow to God. If you deliver the Ammonites into my hand, whatever emerges from the doors of my house toward me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be for God, and I will tender it as a burnt offering. Anybody heard of this story before? He makes a vow. If you make me victorious, then whatever comes out of my house towards me, the first thing to walk out of the doors of my house, you see where this is going. Whatever walks out of my house shall be for God. Okay? Jephthah traveled to the Ammonites to battle them, and God delivered them into his hand. He smote them from Aroer until Minit, 20 cities, and up to Avel Cheramim. He struck them a mighty blow. The Ammonites were subjugated to the Israelites. Jephthah came to Mitzvah to his house, and behold, his daughter was coming out toward him with timbrels and dance. Oy. Timbrels and dance. She was an only child. Other than her, he had neither a son nor a daughter. When Jephthah saw her, this victorious leader, general from the army, after 19 years of oppression, when Jephthah saw her, he rent his clothes and he said, "Alas, my daughter, you have destroyed me, and you are the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to God, and I cannot go back." She said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to God. Do unto me as you vowed, because God has exacted vengeance upon your enemies, the Ammonites." She further said to her father, "Allow me one request. Leave me be for 2 months, and I shall go and wail upon the mountains. I will mourn my virginity, I and my companions." Jephthah said, "Go," and he sent her away for 2 months. She went with her companions and lamented her virginity upon the mountains. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, and he carried out his vow. And she never knew a man. It became a statute in Israel every year. Daughters of Israel went to lament the daughter of Jephthah, the Gileadite, 4 days every year. What don't you understand?
She went to the mountain and lamented, but I don't understand what it means. She never met a man.
It said he carried out his vow. I guess she never married.
Okay.
That's pretty gruesome, huh? I told you I couldn't relate to this guy.
No, it's like he gave her an offering.
He made her an offering.
Yeah,
He put her on an altar like a cow,
that's right. Yeah.
and he slaughtered her, and he burnt her as a burnt offering before God.
Not a good man.
I mean, this is shocking.
When did he think to come out of his house when he made the vow? I mean, I don't understand it.
I don't know, maybe he thought an ox.
He knew some human being would come out.
And maybe he meant out of his ranch. Maybe he had like a cow, a goat. I think that he was thinking about a goat. Nah, something, a sheep. I don't know. He figured the odds. He has 50 sheep and 100 heads of cattle, and he has 1 daughter. What are the odds? It's like Russian roulette, this, you know?
Probably a house with a big fence with animals.
Mike, what do you think of the story?
I'm not quite sure what to think yet. I don't have an opinion. I think it's a lot.
Yavi.
Why nobody else, what we talked before about why nobody else stopped him from doing it?
Why nobody stopped him? Yeah, where were the rabbis? But they were like, okay, yeah, go right ahead.
Where is his friend?
You got to hold the guy back and say, stop, Alan.
I think taking out of context the era, and it's an era of tyranny of the rabbis and the leaders and the judges, all were corrupt. And this just sort of follows suit with the paganistic mentality of that era.
Well,
When you look at it, how is it different today when a radical Muslim encourages his son to blow himself up in the name of God? Same thing.
But the judges didn't put it on the altar, he put it on the altar.
Well, he was the judge of the generation. This guy is the judge of the generation. Now, I just want to address the first point you said, Alan. And that is, when I said before that the rabbis were corrupt or the judges were weak or whatever, it means that the regular rabbis, but this is the judges that we listed on page 7, those were like godly appointed people. Of all the great people of the Jewish people, Jephthah is probably the lowest, the least holy. I don't know if that's a correct word, but he's probably the most misunderstood, to say it nicely. And that's why I said to you, I really cannot relate to this guy. I really cannot relate to this guy. It's like, and I want you to see, just for further context.
God would want him to do this.
Well, that's a good question, which I want you to look at.
What about the conflict between what happened to Abraham and Isaac that God stopped it? Why did God didn't stop it here? And why do you look at Abraham in different way just because?
I think Abraham was holier. And Abraham deserved to have an angel.
He's going to do it. He's going to sacrifice his son.
It's not every day that God sends an angel who says, hey, stop. I think Abraham deserved a personal visit from God. Jephthah maybe didn't deserve it. Let's take a look for added context to Alan's question. On page 33, for added context, at Appendix B. I want you to see just further context, just to help us guide our thoughts here. Ashley, can you lower the air? Thanks. When Jephthah approached to sacrifice his daughter, she was crying to him, Dad, she said, I greeted you with joy, and now you'll slaughter me? What's up? Is it perhaps written in the Torah that we should offer human sacrifices? Is it not written in the Torah if a person amongst you wishes to offer a sacrifice to God, it shall be an animal? Leviticus? An animal, she said. Not a human. My daughter Jephthah responded, I'm sorry, I vowed whatever emerges from the doors of my house, I will tender for a burnt offering. Are you suggesting that I may renege on my vow? Look at this guy. He's like, I'm a very religious guy. I'm a very religious person. You can't ask me to break my word. It's almost comical, you know? She responds, she says, Jacob vowed to God that everything you give to me, I will tithe to you. God granted him 12 sons. Did he sacrifice any of them to God? 12 sons. He should have given up 1.2 to God. All this she said to her father, yet he did not listen to her. Instead, he sacrificed her, and the voice of God thundered. The voice of God, Alan, for you, what did God say? Do I wish for you to offer human lives to me? I never commanded this, never spoke of this, nor did it ever enter my mind, Jeremiah. So, God is clearly opposed to this. You know, a lot of the things that we do, some things that we do are not exactly consistent with God, you know. Avi, why doesn't God stop any murder? Why didn't God stop the murder? Because, you know, He lets us have free choice. You know what I mean? He does allow us the free choice. Right? Just because God didn't stop the murder didn't mean that God wants it to happen. I mean, we discussed that in the previous seminar, which is a very deep question, but, hi Mark. But my point is, you get a little more context here in what happened. Michael, what were you going to say, Michael? Saunders?
No, I was wondering, I find the sequence of verbiage to be kind of vague.
Okay, what do you mean? What's the problem?
Well, he says, it's almost like doublespeak. I will tender it as a burnt offering. Tender is an offering. Tender it as a burnt offering. Is that real?
Tender is a burnt offering?
No, tender is to offer.
Right, so offer is a burnt offering.
As a burnt offering. Okay. Then I go to the back. I wonder why it said at the end of 2 months she returned to her father and he carried out his vow. And she never knew a man. And the point is, why? I don't understand that context.
There's something a little off here in the words. It should have said, and he killed her.
I find it troublesome.
It should have said, and he killed her. Right? Also, what's this? And any other problems you got with the text over there? Anybody else? Anybody else have any other problems with the text that seem to confuse what exactly happened here?
She went with her companions.
Okay.
She went to the mountain home
No, for 2 months she went.
with her companions.
That was just a party. She just went to party for 2 months. She was like, okay.
Her companions.
No, she went with her friends.
Oh, she
Obviously didn't believe that her father was going to do it. Because I run away.
You John, oh, that's smart. Yes, I never thought of that.
Do that. I
If she knew her dad is that crazy, just don't come
I
back.
would never come back. So,
Good point. I never thought of that one. Good one. Yes, Avi. Maybe she didn't believe he was going to do it.
I mean, but
You know, I think that's a very valid point. Avi, yes. What?
She went with her girlfriend. When you read the Hebrew text.
Oh, it says girlfriends? Is that what it says? Well, chaverot.
Reotai.
Is that feminine? Okay, fine. Good. Okay, fine. Girlfriends. Okay. Not transgender or anything.
No, yeah.
Just checking. Sorry. No, but really, I'm eating. I think that's a very good point you make there.
I mean, so she obviously didn't think her father was going to do it.
Because if she thought, and maybe he didn't do it. Maybe he didn't do it. In other words, here's what I'm saying. It doesn't actually say that he killed her. It says he carried out his vow, and she never knew a man. It's like saying, he carried out his vow, and never again did she go to Bloomingdale's.
Oh my God.
What?
First impression.
What? But you understand?
They never got married.
Oh,
But it did say in the other.
so let's not look at page 34 for a moment. In this text, imagine if it said, he carried out his vow, and never again did she go to Bloomingdale's. You're like, what? What? You know, what?
Exactly my point.
There's something here which is trying to tell us, right? Also, what did she go to the mountains for? To mourn my virginity.
To let him cool down.
No. She goes to the mountain to mourn her virginity. I think she might be missing the point here. You're about to be executed,
Yeah.
burnt offering, and she's going to mourn her virginity. That wedding dress, I'm never going to be in that wedding dress.
She knew she was going to go.
What?
I think she maybe knew that her father was going to sacrifice her, so she would be a virgin and never marry a kid. Wasn't it the thing, you're supposed to have children. Women were supposed to have children back then. Wasn't it?
You mean that's probably maybe the most important thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
Wasn't that important?
Look, it's unfathomable that a Jewish leader would actually practice human sacrifice. The Incas, the Aztecs, everybody else was busy doing this stuff. The pagans. What was the cool thing? Yeah, you bought a new house. Okay, I'll sacrifice my firstborn. No problem. An appreciation to the idol. That happened all the time. But for Jews, this was always a total no-no. So all these details, all these pointers together, lead many of the commentaries to the conclusion on page 17. I mean, if you look on page 16, text number 7 is explicit prohibition of human sacrifice. But let's go to page 17. From the Ibn Ezra commentary. The meaning of the verse is, whatever emerges from the doors of my house shall be for God or will be tendered as a burnt offering. Shall be for God or tendered as a burnt offering. Not and I will tender it as a burnt offering. Meaning, if that which comes forth from the doors of my house will be a man or a woman, he or she shall be holy to God, that is an ascetic, who will live in seclusion and serve God with prayer and praise, someone who's not going to get married, celibate, devoted to God. If, however, that which emerges will be something suitable for sacrifice, like an animal, Avi, this answers your question, I will tender it as a burnt offering. And this is what Jephthah did, according to Ibn Ezra. He built her a house for his daughter outside the city. There he provided for her, and she lived in solitude all her life. She never knew a man. And that would be the emphasis on this virginity thing over and over again, because that was the biggest problem. This is a Rapunzel-like story. He made her Rapunzel. In fact, Abarbanel says that this is the origin of the Christian practice of monastery. That if you're a nun, you're now married to God, and you don't need to be married to anybody else. You know, when the nuns were having a confirmation ceremony, a bunch of Hasidim walked in. And they sat down in the front row, so the priest looks at them and he says, can I help you? You look a little lost. They said, no, we're here for the ceremony. Really? You know the nuns? And they said, no, we're here to represent the groom side. You know, in the Hebrew, that what?
It's interesting though what you said, how you can figure out how things emerge.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is. It's very interesting too. But I want to tell you also, when it says here that they had 4 days a year to lament the daughter of Jephthah, in the Hebrew, letanot can also be translated as to entertain. That 4 days a year they would go not to lament her, but to entertain her. Avi, help me with that. How can letanot be entertain? The word letanot, it's at the bottom of page 14, the very last line. How can letanot be entertain? I couldn't find, I read it in the commentary, but I couldn't really find the reason how that word could be entertained. Huh? What?
I cannot figure it.
According to the Ibn Ezra here, apparently he sees a connection. But anyways, no. Does this answer resonate with you guys? Shari?
How do we know that even Ezra didn't try to tie this up in a nice bow to explain that he actually sacrificed his daughter?
He says that he did not sacrifice his daughter.
I know, but how do we know that explanation is not to tie it up in a nice bow so we can live with it?
To make it look nice.
Yeah, so we can live
Well,
with the fact that
Well, let me ask you, Shari, let me ask this question. How do you feel about the solitary confinement answer? Are you okay with that one? Does that make you feel better?
no, I think that he followed through. He said he was going to sacrifice her, and he sacrificed her. That's what I think.
Okay. The other opinion, the Ibn Ezra, okay? Who says that he put her in solitary confinement for the rest of her life.
Just as bad.
Is it just as bad? Or is it worse?
Worse.
What's worse, to kill your daughter or to leave her in solitary confinement for the rest of her life?
It's for whom?
Leave her, yeah, yes.
Just putting it in solitary confinement.
You know,
Let him live with himself.
Recent studies have shown that even normal people in solitary confinement, after a very short few months, start developing mental problems. I mean, this is not normal. It's not good for any human social being. This is a living torture. It's almost better to just kill her and end the suffering, the torture, instead of letting her live in torture for the rest of her days. Can you imagine she got sick, no one to treat her? What?
So what are we debating, the level of evil?
Right, well, exactly. Both are cruel. And it's debatable which one is even worse than the other. So it's not like it makes even us feel better by saying, oh, you know what, he didn't actually kill her. He just locked her up in a cage for the rest of her life. The classic rabbinic position, by the way, as Mike suggested, is that he actually did kill her. Let's take a quick look at that one on page 18. Do not be misled by the empty argument of Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra, for it is foolishness. The last line, rather the story transpired precisely as the simple reading of the verses indicate. He actually killed her. Today, we will not apologize for Jephthah. Today, we're going to extract the lessons of the multiple failures that led to this tragedy. Strength and struggle, yeah.
So, I'm reconciling this in my mind. I'm asking the question that I think this gentleman asked earlier about Abraham and
Isaac.
And now we have this issue. The only two difference there is Abraham was ordered by God to do so, right? And in this instance, this man made an oath to God that he would do so, assuming that
Right.
he's dead.
Right.
So the struggle that he had is following through with something that he had, an oath to God, and how does he reconcile that in his mind to do so or not to do so? And that's why you see these various interpretations. It's just either way.
When God tells you to do something, you know it's okay.
Well, I'd probably struggle with it, but if God came in front of me, I don't think I'd have much choice. I mean, really. So it's
You don't have much choice. You just got to do it, right?
yeah,
But here, this guy, maybe...
he made the oath. He made the offer randomly, and he probably, when it happened, remember his reaction was, "Oh my goodness, you're killing me."
Right, you're killing me. Right. Look, let's just reframe. So far, what we've done so far here tonight is only really explain the story. We've explored and discovered a new story of a famous biblical figure of our nation's rich heritage. His name is Jephthah. You don't find many people naming their sons Jephthah, by the way. Not a very common name. No, Yitzchak is different. Jephthah. This is Jephthah. Jephthah is actually a verb, which means he shall open. It's actually a verb. It's a very you don't know anybody called Jephthah, right? Yeah, you don't, right? Okay. So what we've done so far is just do the story, but let's examine the parameters here. So Michael, you're suggesting that when he makes an oath, does he really need to carry it out? It's a good question. Imagine I come up to my Yom Kippur pledge, and before the ark, the holy ark on the holiest day, I say, I hereby pledge the house of Michael and Rochelle Saunders to charity. I mean,
Thank you.
yeah. Round of applause. What am I supposed to do about this now, right? I mean, how is that a valid pledge? When this guy makes an oath and he says, well, I'm going to slaughter her, that's really not your right to decide. And the rabbis should have told him so. The leader, just one thing I want to say, the leader of the generation, the great high priest of the generation, his name was Pinchas. Pinchas was actually the great nephew of Moses. If you remember the story in the Torah, when there was the plague, the adultery in front of Moshe, he was the one, Pinchas, who stabbed them and he stopped the plague. Pinchas lived a long time, and he's the high priest, he's an old man. He should have said, come over to Jephthah, and he said, listen, I heard about this. You had 2 months to hear the story, right? Mm-hmm. He said, I heard about this, and I want you to know that you can't pledge Michael Saunders' house to charity. You can't vow to kill someone else and say, oh, I'm a religious man, I have to fulfill my vow. The rabbi should have said that to him, yeah.
So we learned previously that one of the most things of Judaism is
Life.
right?
So last week's Torah portion.
This man, all of a sudden, make a vow to God and says, I'm going to take someone's life.
Well, the answer is page 19. Jephthah's oath was improper. Not only Jephthah, but also Pinchas, the son of Elazar, who was alive at that time, and Jephthah should have gone to him to annul his vow, even if it was a valid vow. He could have annulled the vow, but he did not. Jephthah said, I am the leader of Israel. I should go to him. Not happening. Pinchas said, the leader, the rabbi, said, he needs me. I'm not going to him. Imagine the rabbi sits in his office and says, well, if somebody needs my help, he's going to have to come to my office. I'm not interested in going to him. Not a good idea. One conducted himself with hubris and the other conducted himself with hubris. Woe is to the man with hubris, for it buries its masters and never results in any good. So here we go, just to summarize it all on the screen, guys. So Jephthah fights this battle. He makes this vow, this absurd vow. Listen, he wasn't exactly a box full of chocolates, like Forrest Gump says, sharpest pencil in the pack. So here she is, and according to many opinions, she lived her life in solitude. This is the original Rapunzel. You should know, a lot of fun. A lot of these nursery rhymes and Harry Potter stories, when you read them, they actually have their origins in Jewish literature. It's very, because we go back a long, long, long time. It's interesting to see the interesting, wacky stories of these fables. So, I haven't looked at Rapunzel for like 30 years. I don't think I've read the story ever in my life. But why was she locked in this tower? Do you remember the story? She was this princess or something, locked in a tower, and her hair, there's no way up to the tower, so this guy climbs up on her hair or something.
That's serious.
Yeah, that's serious. So, what was she even doing in this tower? Who locked her in there? This is a pretty good argument for why she was there. So here we are, and woe to the man of hubris. This guy's got hubris, right? Jephthah should have gone to the rabbi, and the rabbi should have gone to Jephthah. Tragically, they both didn't, and if you look over the page 20, you'll see how they were both punished. Jephthah died a very miserable death, where his body parts literally fell off of his body, slowly. And that's why he was buried in many places, not in one place. Sounds pretty nasty. And Pinchas also was punished. He lost the divine prophecy, which is also pretty bad. So this concludes the narrative. In conclusion, we've got a lot of mistakes going on here. A lot of mistakes. There was when Jephthah was kicked out by his brothers and the rabbis didn't protest. They made mountains out of molehills and molehills out of mountains. You have the mistake of Jephthah, Jephthah had a very toxic mix between ignorance. He never got an education, obviously. But ignorance on itself is okay. The problem is when you have ignorance mixed with a healthy dose of arrogance. Oy, that's when you got a real problem. When you think you know everything and you know absolutely nothing, that's a real problem. And that's what the problem, the Jephthah's problem. Pinchas, on the other hand, the high priest, should have had a good old-fashioned doctor's call, a house visit, and come say hello. So let's apply this to us. Again, we're not apologizing for Jephthah. We're just extracting a story as it's written in the Torah. And we're saying, okay, what can this story do for me? If we've studied a story in the Torah and we've not learned its lesson, then we've completely missed the point. So what kind of person was Jephthah, in your opinion? Was he an evil person? Was he God-fearing, simpleton? Was he responsible for his actions or not? You think he was God-fearing, Ms. Berenson? Ignorant. Was he misguided? Was he well-intentioned?
Well, I think he was misguided. Who knows when he was, when he left, when they kicked him out, what kind of life did he lead? He didn't maybe have any foundation. Maybe
I wonder what age they kicked him out.
Yeah, that's another good point.
Maybe he was 3 years old, 2 years old. Who knows?
Well, I'd like to think he was older than that. But
Maybe they threw him into an orphanage.
it depends on where he was.
Imagine he grew up in an orphanage,
Yeah.
right?
So that he didn't have the same principles maybe as some.
He could be the victim of a childhood trauma. Mother is a prostitute, father who doesn't talk to him, rejected by his brothers. He could have been a victim of childhood trauma.
Thought processes were different. He didn't know to go to the rabbi.
Denied a proper education. Maybe didn't know to go to the rabbi. All he knew was his pagan friends, and all that they were doing was pagan offerings and sacrifices, and that's what he knew. You offer your child as a sacrifice to God, it's no big deal. I won the war.
But they knew enough to go get him to fight.
Who?
They used him enough. They used him to.
They knew, but he himself was misguided, seems to be well-intentioned. He needed a lot of counseling, a lot of psychiatry. You know, I sent out an email this past.
Raised on the street and you're tough. That's why they went to get him. Be the leader and to fight.
You know, I sent out an email this past Friday about forgiving your mother.
So good.
Thank you. I got amongst many responses. One of them was from a person I know whose father died before he was born. His mother was a real problem in his life. And he wrote to me, he said, if my mother was born a little later, she would have been privileged or she would have had the benefit of counseling and medications. But he actually wrote to me and he said that based upon your recommendation, I think I'm going to get over this, which is very powerful. But you got to give these people the benefit of the doubt, you know? You know, we blame our parents and grandparents. These were Holocaust survivors, you know? You know, my grandparents were in Auschwitz. Talk about childhood trauma. Imagine what my mother grew up with. I can't even relate. You know, well, my mother was a daughter of Auschwitz survivors. So if I have any issues with my mother, I gotta put it into perspective.
Exactly.
You know, so if my problem was that I didn't get the color bike that I wanted, and that was my childhood trauma, you know, there's a difference here, right? So it's not an excuse. All of this is not an excuse for Jephthah's awful behavior. It's just an explanation of his tragic mistake. And I think that before we throw him under the bus, we can admit, if we're honest with ourselves, that we also are guilty of well-intentioned mistakes. We also mean well a lot of the time, and we make mistakes. Okay, we're not sacrificing our daughters, you know. We make mistakes, and good people make mistakes. Human nature doesn't change as much as we think the story is irrelevant. It still doesn't change.
I think you should look at this also in the context of what was going down with the Ammonite, what's going with the Israelites at that time, that they left God, you know.
Right.
Very bad time.
A lot of idol worship.
Look what a big, we don't talk about the big victory that he had.
And what about it?
Maybe all of this really, he thought that he's thanking God, you know, by this vow.
Yeah, maybe he was really excited to thank God. I'm going to offer you something very, you know, imagine God does something very good for you, right? And you say, you know what, I'm going to, you know, in today's terms, you'd say, I'm going to donate a big donation to the Jewish community, right? You might do that, right? So maybe that's what he was thinking. I'm going to donate something which is so precious to me, the apple of my eye, my daughter. Maybe that's what he was thinking. Yeah, Ed.
Over the years, he had to survive.
Yeah.
He also had to build some sort of an army to help him survive.
Right.
That's why the brothers came after him. He was
Okay.
already known as a military man.
Okay.
When he promises he's going to do this, this, and this, in those days, animals did live within your compound
Okay, so?
before the door.
Right, so what?
So when he said that, his assumption was an animal probably would have come out.
Right, we said. So it was well intentioned.
But because of his background and survival instincts, and here God, he felt, helped him win this war, and his daughter came out, he had to do this. And
Okay, but it was a big mistake.
I'm saying.
He meant well, like we said. Okay, he meant well, but he made a mistake. But
It's the
specifically,
it's the survival instinct that he was.
why is that a survival instinct to kill his daughter?
Because he made a promise.
Okay, but that's a really
That's-
foolish promise.
In a lot of cases, in general.
All right, and I'm running out of time. I gotta wrap it up. So your point?
In general,
Yeah,
builds a respect by his men.
by his words. Oh, that's what you're saying. He needed to build the respect by his men by sacrificing his daughter, by fulfilling his word. Okay, if ever I heard misguided, that would be it. Okay, because I think he'd get more respect from his men by not killing his daughter. Look, guys, I want to move it forward. Okay, so I want to say like this: that in addition to us identifying somewhat generally with Jephthah's mistake from a distance, how many of us are guilty of Jephthah's specific mistake?
You mean promising something?
No. How many of us have sacrificed our own daughters upon the altars of our own ego? How many of us have sacrificed the childhood of our children, the youth of our children, because of the office? Because we spent too much time making money in the office. How many of us have thrown a kid, have lost our temper at a kid, or at a spouse, or at a parent, because of the altar of, let me finish the point, because of the altar of our ego and our pride. You're sitting in a restaurant, your spouse does a klutzy move, spills the wine or something, and you tell the waiter, she's such a klutz, she does it all the time. Why? Because you need to remove yourself from the situation. God forbid you should be perceived as a klutz. That's why you throw her under the bus. Where what you're doing is that you're sacrificing the pride of someone else, maybe not physically murdering them, but at least emotionally murdering them, throwing them upon the altar because of your career, because of your ego, because of your pride, your impatience.
What about your belief? You're not like what I'm going to say, but what about the Orthodox, the way they marry their daughter?
Marry the daughter, what do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, what do you mean?
The Orthodox Jews then.
I mean, in New York, the ultra-Orthodox and everything. I mean, the girl cannot decide who should be.
Well, hold on. When you say the Orthodox, you sound like talking about the Jews. You're talking about the Jews, you know? Well, there are some groups where they don't allow the children to make their own marital decisions. I'm not sure what that is, quite frankly. I don't know what they're doing, quite frankly. I don't know what that is. I really don't know.
No, but in this era that we're talking about, that's a very good point. Women had no place in society, and they were not treated with respect.
Not in the Jewish society.
Very
In the Jewish society, they were treated with respect. But I'll tell you why. Because in the Jewish society, there was the ketubah, which protected the woman, where no other society or culture had that.
Yeah, and a lot of
No, when she
women
was
wanted
married, a
to
single girl,
No, a single girl was by her father, correct.
a single girl had her own.
Correct. Well, she was under the jurisdiction of her father.
Right. So,
Look, yes, I agree. I don't know if I agree with the exact example, but let me give you a different example of the religious. So you have someone, and this happens all the time, we have somebody who's very religious, and he will publicly shame a fellow Jew for having made a religious mistake. For let's say one rabbi sees another rabbi doing something which is maybe not so appropriate, like a gray area. Let's say he's sitting down at a non-kosher event, which is like a gray area kind of thing, you know? So this first rabbi, who's so religious, is now going to tell the whole world lashon hara, slander, about this rabbi for having been so sinful of sitting down. Meanwhile, look who's calling the kettle black. I mean, the same God that doesn't want you eating non-kosher or even giving the perception that you're eating non-kosher also forbade you something else. He also forbade you to slander other people, right? So in other words, in the name of his own ego, really, he threw the other guy under the bus, right?
I totally disagree. And the reason I do is that God gave us an ego. We're expected to make mistakes. We all do. But there's a big difference of making a mistake and doing what you're saying and killing someone. You cannot have an analogy.
I'm not saying that we are killing people. Look, I'm not saying that we're exactly the same as Jephthah. What I am trying to do is to bring out a spiritual connection to the story of Jephthah. I'm not saying we all therefore are child murderers. I'm not saying that, God forbid. What I am saying is that there is something here. There's something which we can extract. There's a message here.
Right, there'd be something wrong, though, if we never did that.
Why would it be wrong?
Because
I think it's evil.
to be human,
I think selfish is evil.
To be human is to make mistakes.
No, to be human means to overcome your natural instinct. Otherwise, you're an animal. Because an animal follows its instinct.
I would like to meet the man who never slandered somebody.
We need to talk. This is human aspirations. Yeah, we maybe you're the first one. Maybe this is an aspiration that we have to reach towards, to rise towards. This is what Torah is teaching us. That it's the supremacy of mind over matter, of purpose over instinct. Animals follow their instinct. They're completely instinctive creatures. Human beings are not instinctive. We overcome our instinct to help other people, to reach down and pick up the fallen. In other words, without condoning the grievous act of Jephthah, I want you to think about if you have ever sacrificed somebody else, and of course we all have, upon our own ulterior motive altars. And when you think about it, it hits a little closer to home than you might realize. Sacrificing our children's youth by spending too much time away from them in the office, sacrificing our spouse's dignity, losing your temper on another person just because of your own ego. And this is a very important message to extract. Let's take another message. Another message. So one big mistake that the rabbis did here was that they procrastinated when it came to the expulsion of Jephthah. Right? Why do we procrastinate? And we know we do. We all procrastinate when it comes to paying your credit card bill and you can't afford it. So you only pay minimum payments, and before you know, you can't afford the minimum payments, right? Procrastinating. Small leak in the roof, you ignore. Health issue. You know that car engine light thing? It's so irritating. That light in the car dashboard. And you just leave it there for months. You know what I'm talking about? Procrastinate. We all procrastinate, right? Overweight.
Engine check.
Yeah, the engine check thing, whatever that means. Check whatever, yeah. You check wallet. When you're renting and when you should be buying. These are all procrastinations that we do, a lot like those rabbis.
That's a matter of opinion.
Well, yeah, but if you know that you should be buying.
Well, how do you know?
Well, then you're not procrastinating. If you know, then you're not procrastinating. If you know, then it's fine. So, not only do individuals procrastinate, but nations procrastinate. When in 1938, when the West turned a blind eye to Hitler's invasion of Sudetenland in Austria, they was like, yeah, whatever, no big deal. They procrastinated. We know where that led to. What? Oh, that was the problem. Okay. So why is it? So what do you think is the reason that we procrastinate? What do you think? What? We don't want to face it.
Afraid to take a chance.
Well, there's an interesting exercise here on the screen. I think that the fear is not the reason of procrastination, in my opinion. But maybe we'll see in a moment. This is a famous exercise. Can you tell me which one is larger? The one on the right? What do you think?
you cut it in the middle and put it together, then you can.
So you know it's experiment.
No.
No? Yeah.
I've never saw it before in my life. That's just my
Okay,
logic.
good. So it's supposed to be a famous experiment where you're supposed to think of one being bigger than the other, or at least different sizes, and they're apparently, when you trace them, they apparently are. I never tried this myself, but there apparently are different sizes. Oh, exactly the same size. I'm sorry. In other words, it's supposed to be an example of an optical illusion. Because our reality, well, that too is an illusion, Nate. Our reality is based on our perceptions. When you see a child having a temper tantrum in Publix, and the mother's denying him what he wants, one person might say, "What a nasty mother! What a pathetic mother." Another one would say, "What a strong mother! What a difficult child!" Right? Yeah. It's not just objects; it's experiences, it's interactions. Everything is dependent on our perspective. There's a prohibition in the Torah here. Take a look. It's in text 11. There's a prohibition which says, page 24. Do not pervert justice. Do not show favoritism. Do not take a bribe. For bribery blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts words that are just. So isn't that interesting? It says, do not pervert justice. Do not show favoritism. And do not take a bribe. The Torah doesn't tell us anything unnecessary. So if it already told us not to pervert justice, then why does it need to say do not take a bribe? What's being added over here when you're being told not to take a bribe? Okay, but do not pervert justice. We already know that.
Pervert justice without taking a bribe.
So it's included. It's like the judge who says, he gets up and he says, "Okay, guys, the one litigant here has given me $15,000 as a bribe, and the other litigant has given me $20,000 as a bribe." He writes out a check of $5,000 to the second litigant, and he says, "Here, now we're even, Stephen. Now let's proceed with the case." What the Torah is telling us here is, even when you're not perverting justice, and all you did was take a bribe, how could that be? Sometimes a litigant will say to the judge, "I don't want you to rule in my favor. I'm giving you this favor, this benefit, only so that you should judge as you see fit." Is that okay? Why not? He's saying, "I don't want you to judge me favorably. I'm asking you to judge honestly." And he has a free iPhone. What?
Guy's an idiot.
Who?
Why would you give somebody money or whatever?
He's wasting his money?
That makes
You think he's wasting his money? Well, the Torah says no, he isn't wasting his money. He's being very smart. Because when you give somebody a favor, there is no way that their perception is not jaded anymore. Even if you said to them, "I want you to be perfectly rational," it's impossible for them to be perfectly fair. And that's why it says, do not pervert justice, and do not take a bribe, even if it doesn't pervert the justice. You still are jading your reality. Okay? In other words, all bribery clouds the vision of the judge. Taking it back to our case, it's faulty perceptions that change our reality. And that's what causes us to procrastinate. Procrastination results from faulty perspective, just like in the case of the brothers of Jephthah. In their case, we said before that they exaggerated an issue, and in their own minds, the power of the ruling families was, they turned this molehill into a mountain, and that jaded their perspective. That caused the judges to procrastinate. And the same thing happened with the honor of the dignity of Jephthah. This mountain, they decided to turn into a molehill and to trivialize his dignity. Typically what happens is, if we choose to trivialize something and therefore procrastinate, like a credit card bill, it comes to bite us in the tuchus pretty quickly. And when we exaggerate something, you're pushing off a certain phone call that you have to do, and you don't want to do it because it's so overwhelming for you. 9 out of 10 times, you know what happens? It's so smooth. It just goes, no problem. How can we avoid these pitfalls? How can we avoid the mistakes that the brothers of Jephthah, that the rabbis in those days made in their procrastination? How can we avoid the pitfalls of trivialization, minimizing real issues, and exaggerating non-issues? So, the Jewish thought shares with us a beautiful little process here. So this little exercise together. So let's start, for starters, to recall a prior instance. We're talking about exaggerating an issue right now. When it comes to exaggerating an issue, recall a prior instance in which you had a problem that you avoided due to its perceived magnitude, something which you thought was too great of an issue. Try to think of something that was too big for you to tackle. All right, you got something? I know what you're thinking, Torah. Okay, now, try to think of the moment when you actually dealt with the issue. And it wasn't so bad, right? Moving forward, take a moment when this happens next to contemplate that God is in control of everything that happens to you. You're not a victim of circumstance, but a master of circumstance. And that God gives you the means and the strength to deal with any issues that befall you. You are in control because God put you here. Make an action plan on how to deal with the current issue. Let your wings lift up, soar on the knowledge that God wants you to be in this situation. And with this approach, we're able to tackle an overwhelming issue. When the judges in the days of Jephthah, the rabbis, would have contemplated on how everything is in the hands of God. When a rabbi realizes that a member of the community is doing a travesty, and yet he made a big donation, the rabbi is going to realize, listen, God put me in this circumstance, and I can't worry about the checkbook. I got to do what I have to do. I got to make the move. Yeah.
I don't want to answer the question. You have a problem like we're talking about, and you recognize it, and you attempt to deal with it, and after a period of time, you come to a conclusion you cannot affect it, even though you're saying this. And then you say to yourself, everything I've done, I can't affect the situation other than have faith and pray to God that it will resolve. I think many people are faced with that type of a task.
Right. Absolutely. For that, I think we can lead into that, segue into the second issue, which is not exaggerating a problem, but trivializing a problem. And I don't think you're trivializing the problem right now, but I'll get to that in just a moment. You see, when you trivialize something, when you minimize it, it's even worse. Because at least when you identify the issue and you exaggerated it, it's an issue. But when you trivialize it, it's not an issue, you don't even notice it. So to deal with that, there's a very powerful teaching here. And that's here in text number 12, where it's stated in the Zohar, masters of reckoning designate time every night to take stock of the day's deeds and determine a course of action toward mending their mistakes. One who makes a reckoning every day will discern improper behavior, make amends for mistakes, and admit his errors. Otherwise, the person will scarcely be aware of his errors, and he will thus come to repeat them and make even worse mistakes. So what this is telling us, before I get to your point in a second, what this is telling us is that you need to have regularly scheduled times for reflection. Cheshbon HaNefesh is what it's called. Reckoning of the soul. You know, sleep is 1/60th of death. And just like you're supposed to have a confession before you die, you're supposed to have a confession every night before you go to bed. You're supposed to actually, there's a prayer in the book, you say Shema in the Siddur. There's a little thing you're supposed to say. And you're supposed to actually sit there and meditate, have a little soul reckoning every night. It's not that easy to do it every night, but at least once a week on a Thursday night, end of the week. You're supposed to have a soul reckoning. To literally think about the issues that face you. And hopefully by sweeping them, you're able to come across and notice what you trivialized, what you ignored. And hopefully recognize and bring it to the forefront. If you can't do it once a day, at least once a week. And a good advice would be to divide and conquer. Can't do everything at one time. So at every sitting you do another meditation, another soul reckoning. Sometimes it's interpersonal relationships. Sometimes it's your relationship with God. Sometimes it's your business. Sometimes it's your parents. And different times you meditate on different things. like the teacher who sees the homework of one of her students. She says, I can't believe one person made so many mistakes in one essay. She says, don't worry, ma'am. My dad helped me. Wasn't just one person. So, let's take a moment to just think about that opening poem again. Remember the opening poem, Shel Silverstein? Follow the voice in your own heart. So does that change at all now? Do you think you should still follow your own heart, Candace? Mm-hmm. You do think. So, the comments from Sherry and Alan were sort of kind of follow your own heart, take into consideration. And that's where Jephthah was wrong. Jephthah's mistake was, I made a vow, I'm religiously bound, and therefore he didn't ask advice of anybody. He didn't consult. He felt that he was not only ignorant, but he felt he was arrogant. He knows everything, right? We all suffer from this as well. We know everything sometimes, right? And that's why we're instructed, a very powerful instruction in text 13 from Ethics of the Fathers, acquire for yourself a mentor, and thus stay away from doubt. We have to acquire for ourselves a mentor. When it comes to exaggerated problems that jade our perspective and cause us to procrastinate, recognizing that process of God's providence can rescue us, give us the courage to move forward. When it comes to trivializing something which causes us to procrastinate, a soul reckoning can make a big difference. But more important than all is to have the courage to acquire for yourself a mentor. A mentor is not necessarily somebody who's smarter than you. Not necessarily somebody who's more experienced than you. A mentor, the advantage that the mentor has over you is specifically that he's not you. Is that it's no longer subjective but objective. The mentor brings to the table what you can never bring to the table, because you are biased with your own perceptions. And that, Alan, I think is a comment to your point. That sometimes you think and you come to the conclusion, I can't do anything about it, therefore I'm going to let it settle, I'm going to pray for it. Maybe that could be a little off. Maybe you're just being chicken. Or maybe you're looking at it in the wrong perspective. By having the courage to have someone else to talk to about everything, and this is the teaching here in the Torah, you have to have someone in your life that you can talk to about everything. Mm-hmm. Because that is going to set you on the right path. If you don't have the courage to find yourself a mentor, if you're so arrogant that you think you know everything, you could potentially land up like Jephthah, who does an epic error, only to discover, I don't know if you ever regretted it, but to make a real mistake. Just consult with someone. And that obviously would apply to, I'm not going to get into the mistake of Pinchas, obviously, which is self-explanatory, how the high priest also, his mistake was that he didn't reach out to Jephthah. This guy has to realize we're all in the same boat. It's not about your honor here that everybody has to come to you. If the Titanic is sinking in one place, you don't say, "Oh, it's not in my cabin. I don't care about it." We're all in the same boat. When the ship goes down, the ship goes down, right? So that is a very important advice to us who all suffer from procrastination. We all suffer from it. Is the combination of imbuing within ourselves a perception of divine providence, giving us the courage to forge forward in the face of great obstacles. Soul reckoning, cheshbon hanefesh, every night or once a week, to re-examine in a new context our errors or omissions, as well as a mentor that can set you straight, that can tell you, listen, I think this is a little off the beaten path. You're straying here. Then that is the fulfillment of the advice of the Mishnah, acquire for yourself a mentor, where these guys all failed. So just to conclude here, and this is obviously what the rabbi should have done, Pinchas, you have to offer advice also. So it's a two-way street here. The one being mentored needs to ask for a mentor, and the mentor himself has to step out and say, listen, I think you're making a mistake, and I need to talk to you here. Okay, so, in conclusion, to wrap this all up, it was multiple failures that led to the death or the solitary confinement of this poor daughter. It was the elders of Gilad who lacked leadership in curbing the brothers. That was because of their procrastinating, because of their jaded, faulty perspective, in trivializing the dignity of Jephthah, in exaggerating the power of the ruling families. We have hopefully found some tools to overcome that in our lives. Jephthah himself sought no counsel. He needed a mentor for sure. Pinchas didn't reach out. He needed to understand what a leader's responsibility is. You're supposed to take the people not only where they want to go, you're supposed to take them to where they need to go. Right? Like I said a few weeks ago, the difference between Chabad and Mercedes-Benz, you know what the difference is?
No.
One's not an acronym.
Mercedes-Benz not an acronym? Okay, but there is one difference between Chabad and Mercedes-Benz. There actually is one.
You don't need a Mercedes-Benz, you need Chabad.
The Mercedes-Benz is selling you something which you want, but you don't need. Chabad is selling you something you don't want, but you do need. So the leaders are supposed to take you to where you need to go, not to where you want to go. You know, I remember when I think it was Bush who was asked by CNN, "What do you think about the polls that are tanking?" And he says, "I don't lead based on polls," which is a very interesting line. Love him or hate him, it's a good line. I like that line. You lead not based upon it's not a popularity contest. I got to take the country the way the country needs to go. Whether he was, his policy is a different argument, right? So obviously the solutions are a heightened belief in divine providence, gives us the confidence to confront the seemingly overwhelming obstacles. The cheshbon hanefesh, soul reckoning, allows us to recognize what we missed. And the mentor helps us to weed out the subjectivity from our decisions. And these tips hopefully will help us greatly in avoiding mistakes that were made in this Jephthah story, especially to avoid, hopefully, placing our loved ones upon the sacrificial altar where they certainly don't deserve to be. This here concludes, my friends, the lesson on Jephthah. Next week we'll talk about the first king of Israel, King Saul, who made some very subtle yet incredibly important errors. And we'll talk about that next week. Remember the JCC class on Tuesday afternoons, the Chabad class Wednesday nights. And I want to tell you also that so this, as noticed, the class is very text-based. If you want to have a textbook, please let Ashley know tonight. She's ordering them in the morning. Please let her know if you'd like to sign up to the class. Any questions, please go right ahead, guys. Any questions?